common. So please welcome probably the most recognizable broadcast name in metal in the tri-state area, of course, nationally, internationally as well, but at least in the New York area, especially, Mr. Eddie Trunk. Ta-da! Hey, Eddie.
JJ, was I a tough booking?
You know, man, you were like the easiest booking on the, you were really great. Now you really, everyone's been really great. And I just said, wow, give Eddie a shot. Let's see. We haven't spoken in a long time and there's so much to talk about. And we all know like a lot of stuff to talk about, but thank you for coming. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me and congrats on this and good luck with it.
Thank you. So I have a book coming out called Twisted Business. It's not the way Gene Simmons sees business. I mean, we're business guys who are in bands, Now, and here's a good question for you, because I never thought to ask this to anyone, but being that Gene is a business person, and that, he doesn't manage KISS, but he, for all intents and purposes, he co-manages, with Doc McGee, I'm sure, and Paul, I'm sure, but he's always talking business, and that I've managed Twisted. What other bands that you have run across, metal bands whose band members are actively involved, if not directly involved with management, almost involved with management?
The one that immediately comes to mind is Skid Row, because Snake is not only he does management stuff for his own band, but Snake for about 20 years has actually worked for Doc McGee and managed other bands. So he plays in Skid Row and is a founding member of that band, but he actually has a day job managing bands that aren't even related in any way to him or Skid Row. So he comes to mind immediately as somebody who learned the ropes from Doc when Doc used to manage him and ended up going to work for him and his company. There's some others. For a while, Tesla was self-managed. Brian Wheat and Frank Hannon managed themselves and managed the band. They don't any longer. They gave up doing that. They've turned it over to somebody. But those are two that come to mind pretty quickly.
Yeah, you of all people will know that the mindset between musician and manager are very different. They're very different talents, and rarely do they wind up in the same person. And I don't mean to blow my own horn, because I don't perceive myself as a musician. I perceive myself as a manager who plays guitar. Okay. And you and I have been dealing, come on, Eddie, you and I deal in the business of Twisted and Eddie Trunk and the projects we're always going. You call me and we figure it out.
Yeah, but I think, JJ, I think that's a really important thing. I think it's great. And I think it's a good cautionary message to younger people in bands that might be listening. It's really good to have one of those people in that band, in your band, that can be those eyes and ears for you, that can take an interest in that stuff. Because how many stories have we heard of bands getting ripped off for signing bad deals or getting a manager and that manager takes advantage of them? So to have somebody that maybe isn't necessarily actually day-to-day management of the band, but knows a little something and is keeping the guard up and keeping their eyes open for the band and keeping an eye on that area of things, I think is a really, really valuable thing.
Yeah, I think it really always galled me growing up and hearing interviews with, we didn't know what we were doing. We didn't pay any attention. We signed stuff and didn't know. We got taken advantage of. And by the way, that not only on management decisions, the other thing kills me is the guys who don't pay taxes. It's like, really, no one told you to pay taxes? So you had to pay taxes. You just got a check and thought, oh, I'll worry about it next year. I mean, how many of those stories do we hear too?
I don't know. I pay my quarterlies. I pay my yearlies. All I'm doing is writing checks for taxes, because I do a lot of work on the road, and whether I'm getting 1099s or, you're always on that. I mean, look, I'm not a band, but I am a guy that's coming up on 40 years in the media and hosting things and working in various areas. And I'm always on top of that stuff. And there's been times here and there throughout my career where I've had maybe a manager for a short period of time or a talent agent for a short period of time. But the truth of the matter is, and some have been great and some of them not so great, but I've always defaulted to me because I've just quickly realized that I'm the only guy that's going to look out for me. I'm the only guy that's going to truly have me at the top of the list instead of at number 22 on the call sheet. And I'm going to be the one in almost every gig that I've had in my career, whether it's radio or TV, I'm the one who went out and got it. I'm the one that went out and made it happen. So nobody is a better manager or agent than themselves if they put the effort into doing it. And sure, I still have lawyer and I still have a booking agent, people that I trust that'll help me here and there. But I think it's really important, whether you're a band or in any walk of life, you've got to make sure that you're looking out for yourself, because nobody's going to do that more effectively than you.
One day I may publish the first management deal that Twisted Sister signed. I found it not long ago in a box somewhere. And our manager was a guy named Frank Friccione. And our agent was a guy named Lou Manganello. You can draw your own conclusions if you wish. I will say nothing.
I've seen the DVD.
except to say that you got it. But Eddie, I think you'll agree. You need to prepare yourself to get your ass kicked and learn lessons, and then hopefully never get it kicked the same way again. Wouldn't you agree? In the risks that you take.
Yeah, I mean, you've got to be resilient. You've got to bounce back. You've got to be able to. You got to be able to take constructive criticism. Obviously, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. But you've got to have a thick skin. You've got to be able to keep coming back. And if you really believe in something and believe that it's something you're capable of doing and are decent at and can get better at and want to do, you got to put the work in. I mean, I'll never forget, for me, I was working in a hardware store. I was in high school and I was listening to my local rock radio station at the time, which was my thing. I mean, the rock station in New Jersey, still on the air, still a rock station, WDHA. It was my backyard radio station. And I was just a kid, listening to that and hearing those DJs and hearing the records they played. And for me, it wasn't about like the lore of New York City radio, which was only 30 miles away. It was, DHA in my backyard might as well been like the epicenter of music as far as I was concerned at that age. And I remember, like, man, how cool would it be if I could ever be on the radio? And one of the DJs that worked there at the time came in the hardware store that I was working in. And I was really excited to just go up to him and say hello and tell him how much I enjoyed the station. And I did. And I remember him saying, I said to him something like, I was probably a sophomore, junior in high school. And I remember saying something to him like, hey, I'd like to work at trying to get a job like yours one time. I'd like to maybe be on that radio station. You think I could do it? I would love to try it. And how do I go about it? And I'll never forget, in that aisle near the 10 penny nails, him saying to me, forget it, not going to happen. And I said, what do you mean? He goes, I can just tell you're not cut out for it. You don't have the voice. You're just not going to do it. Right. And he goes, just not going to happen, man. He goes, think about something else. It's not going to be right for you. I can tell. And I was like, wow. And look, I actually really appreciate, and I'm a fairly outspoken guy and I'm sometimes too honest. So I wasn't angry at him, but what it did to me was say, I mean, nothing drives me more than somebody telling me I can't do something. So I'm like, I'm going to make sure that I prove this guy wrong, and I'm going to be working at that radio station with this guy. And I did. I ended up, a couple of years later getting the job there. So that's always been the way I've been wired.
Did you remind him? Did you remind him of that conversation at some point? You must have.
Well, ironically, and this is the truth of the matter, is he was dismissed from the station not long after I got there. Because of some shady, nefarious deal that was going on at the time. So I ended up kind of taking his slot, which is even crazier.
Wow.
So, but that to me was a very eye-opening lesson early on of like, okay, I could have easily gotten down on it and folded my tent and said, I'm not going to do this and I'm not cut out for it and he's right. But instead it rallied me in another way. Okay, how can I get better? How can I prove this guy wrong? And that went, like, that mentality of mine, because I was always told no, and I was always the outcast, and I was always told that the music I liked sucked and all that, that when I got on the radio, a lot of people were taking stage names or radio names, fake names. And I remember they're like, well, what name do you want to be? I go, no, I want to be my name. And Eddie Trunk is my real name. And everyone's like, well, why wouldn't you want a radio name? I go, because I want every single person who told me I couldn't do this to know it's me when I talk on this radio. Every person in high school that wanted to kick my ass in the locker and push me against the locker, I want them to know it's me they're hearing. So to that day, I never used a different name.
Yeah, that's, those kinds of memories are so cool. There was a club in Yonkers called the Rising Sun. And actually, it was next door to where the son of Sam, David Berkowitz, actually lived in Yonkers on Central Avenue. So rumor had it that he had come down during the years that we were playing there and saw us and Rat Race Choir. It's like a side story, but just to give you an idea. So there's this club called Rising Sun. And Eddie, in the annals of the bar business, especially the old time guys, like in the 70s, in 1970, to be in a bar band, most of the bars were owned by guys who've owned them since the 50s. So there's these old grizzly guys who used to book doo-wop groups, you know what I mean? And now they're confronted with heavy metal and glam and stuff they don't understand, but they understand money, so they're going to book us, but they don't like it in particular. And this one particular guy, this one particular club, just he used to say to me, you guys are chopped meat, you guys are nothing, And I think Aerosmith had played there when he goes, yeah, Steven Tyler Rico used to work here, but you guys, you're not, never going to make it. And I remember this guy, of all the guys, I remember that voice, you're never going to make it. So what happens? 1985, we're basking in Twisted Sister, superstardom. Someone said to me, man, why don't you go up and visit Mo and Petey at the Rising Sun? And so I go up there in a limousine. Apparently they had told Mo and Petey, I get there and in the front window is our album and pictures of Twisted Sister playing at the Rising Sun. And I walk in and there's Mo and Petey and I go, so I see the memorial. Thank you. But I thought you told me we sucked. They go, we were just trying to make you tough. That's all. We wanted to prepare you for the tough world. And apparently we did a good job.
So now they want the credit, right? Now they want the credit for the motivation.
They started here. Started here. So that, okay. So you were born in 1964, right?
Correct.
So let's look. So I'm born in 1952. So in 1967, Sgt. Pepper comes out, and obviously it changes the world. And it's 15. I'm 15. So it's a nexus point for my life. Like everything explodes. So that album lays at the epicenter of the explosion of my hippie days and evolution as a musician and as a person, et cetera, et cetera. When you were 15, so you're talking 1979. Twisted was now, a super bar band at the time, and you're 15. Did it hit you at 15? Like, what was the first album or thing that you heard that just kind of was your Sgt. Pepper, lit you on fire and said, I love this kind of music and I want to promote this. This is in my DNA.
Well, there's two very, very, very defining moments. So the very, very first time would have been around 1973, which would have made me around 9. And up to that point, all I was listening to musically was either stuff I overheard my parents playing or stuff I heard on AM radio. And also the records I would have owned at that point, again, very young. So I had like a close and play record player, and I would get 45s, and I was watching the Partridge Family and stuff like that. So that TV music sort of stuff, that was all I really knew for music.
And by the way, you listen to AM radio still, which was pop radio. Was it like WABC, for example?
Yeah,
were you listening to that?
Yep.
Was Bruce Morrow still on the station at the time?
Yeah,
Cousin
yeah.
Brucey? So
Yeah.
you did have that. We do share that, a bit of that.
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't know that you did or not. Okay.
Yeah, so I would get in the back seat of my parents' car, and the AM radio was all, the little speaker sat right in the middle of the two seats, and it was right by my ear. And I got in the car, and it was probably ABC or whatever channel station was on. And it was something that I never will forget. The DJ played a song by a group called the Raspberries. And the song was called Go All the Way, which is their biggest hit. And the song, for people that know it, is very melodic, but also that melody is up juxtaposed throughout the song against this very driving, distorted guitar riff. And when I heard that mix of this pop melody, like I had heard on these other things, but against crashing, distorted guitar, even at 9, 10 years old, I was like perked up immediately. And I heard the name of the band. I asked my parents to take me to the record store. And I remember the record store clerk was amazed because I wanted the album. I did not want the 45. And the Raspberries were a 45 singles band. And he's like, we don't really sell the full records, but I may have a copy. So I got the full record. And for like 2 years, I was consumed with this band, the Raspberries. And they were my first love in rock music. And you'll remember this, JJ, because very close to my hometown, there was a bar, which I'm sure Twisted probably played, called The Joint in the Woods.
We did.
And it was in Parsippany, New Jersey.
Yes, it was. And it was gigantic, if I remember. It was huge.
It's been gone since I've been an adult. I mean, I don't even know. I think there's a hotel there or something now.
Kiss played there. Do you know that?
A lot of bands did. Yeah, I've seen old ads from there.
Kiss played in '73. Kiss played there. Blackfoot played there. I went to see Blackfoot because they were friends of mine. It was a giant. People who don't understand the Jersey clubs, how insanely gigantic they were back in those days. So anyway, so go ahead.
Yeah. So the reason why I mentioned that club is because I remember that I heard and I saw an ad. It may have been the Aquarian or something where the Raspberries were playing there. And it was towards the very end of their career. And my parents were always very supportive of my love of music, and they liked rock music themselves. And I remember my mom calling because, I was so young, but hey, can we bring him and stand in the back? And they wouldn't let me come in because obviously I was a kid. So it came that close to having that moment. And then years later, I got to know the guys and did stuff with them on TV, and that's a whole other story. But so there was that. But then the real thing that would have set me on my path and just changed everything was walking home from junior high school. I walked past a record store every day with my friend. We went in the same record store I bought the Raspberries in, a record store called Scotty's. And he said, I'm going to go in and buy a record. And I said, okay, what do you get? And he goes, well, come on, I'll show you. He goes, I'm going to buy a record by this band called Kiss. And I said, I never heard of them. And he said, yeah, check it out. So he said, their new record, this is 1976, so I would have been 12. He said, their new record is called Rock and Roll Over. He said, but I don't know how it is. So if you want to try them out, I'd suggest getting the previous record because that one I know is good because I have it. So I had some money, and the previous record, for those that know, is Destroyer. So I bought Kiss Destroyer, didn't know what I was getting, took it home, took the cellophane off, dropped the needle. For those that know that record, it opens with this thematic thing into Detroit Rock City. I staring at the cover, and game over. Like so many other people that you'll know and people that you talk to around my age, for the next couple years, there was no other band than Kiss. The Raspberries were wearing a leisure suit on the cover of their album jacket. Kiss was Kiss, and my walls, my ceiling, my life was nothing. Any other band at that age to me was a threat to Kiss. So it's like, I don't want to even know about other music. And until Aerosmith, I let them in next. But that was it. Hearing the Raspberries, year or two later, getting Destroyer, and then that was it.
It's interesting that you point that out because we're still talking 73, 74. Is that right?
Well, Destroyer, when I got the first Kiss record, was 76.
76. Okay. So, Kiss had it pretty much to themselves for a while. What did you get drawn into the Alice Cooper thing at all? I mean, did you kind of look at Kiss and go, well, I like Alice, or you didn't even go peripherally into that side of it? By the way,
I
folks, for
did.
those listening, I'm in Manhattan. It's a typical day. That's why you hear the sirens in the background. You know, just another murder. It's New York City. We can't sleep without these things going on at night. You know, I can't. The country cricket's not happening. I need sirens, death, murder, bullets. Okay. Anyway,
That's the soundtrack for JJ right there.
So anyway, so nothing else. It was just really just Kiss. Nothing else.
It was Kiss. It was Kiss like obsession. I mean, it was, again, that time period, 76, 77, 78. Kiss is the biggest band in the world. The TV movie, Alive 2. My first ever concert comes the next year. They played 3 nights at the Garden. I went the third and final night, December 16th, 77, my first concert. Mm-hmm. So for 2-3 years, literally every inch of my wall, ceiling, Kiss posters and what have you. And then what happened was, I've realized after, like, because I had, again, I'm very young at this point, and I have this mentality that I'm all in on the Kiss army, and anything that isn't Kiss is a threat to Kiss. Like, they could take the crown, because back then a lot of the press was like Kiss versus Led Zeppelin and Kiss versus, and that's the way the media was in music then. So I was like Team Kiss, so anything else had to be shielded off. And then a couple years after that, like I said, the next band I let in was Aerosmith, and it was a huge moment because the Aerosmith live album Bootleg had a poster that came in it, and I got that record and I looked at the poster, and I'm looking around my walls and I'm like, there's literally no place for the poster. I'm like, can I actually live with myself taking a Kiss poster down to make room for this alien band infiltrating? And I did. I actually put it on my closet door. I'll never forget it. I'm like, okay, this poster's kind of lame for Kiss. And right there in the middle of this sea of Kiss stuff went the Bootleg poster. I mean, I don't remember a lot, but I remember that like it was yesterday. It's crazy.
But you didn't adopt Led Zeppelin during that period of time, right? Is
no,
that fair to say?
No. I mean, because in my high school, JJ, when I got to high school, here's the other thing. I've always been defiant about what I like and don't like. I don't believe in guilty pleasures. If it makes you happy and you like it, that's all that should matter. And but when I was in high school, I graduated high school in 82. So when I'm in high school, 79, 80, 81, 82, you could not like Kiss at a worse time. 79, the disco record they make. Right. 80, a pop record they make. Right. 81, right. A very poorly received concept record they make. You couldn't, like, if I wasn't a big guy, people wanted to beat my ass physically for like.
You were staying loyal, but you stayed loyal.
I stayed loyal. Wore the shirt, had the sticker on my notebook, didn't care. I've always been like that. But it made me the outcast, and people wanted to physically beat my ass. That's how bad it was to be a Kiss fan at that time. But I would not give it up. And the thing with Zeppelin, which I only got into much later, was that, and I know this sounds ludicrous to people now, but Zeppelin was often pitted against Kiss in some of the media as which was the superior band. And in my high school, all the stoners and all that crowd that I wasn't in, they loved Zeppelin. So they laughed at me for being a Kiss fan. So that made me even more like tuned out to Zeppelin, because I'm like, fuck those guys. I don't want to know about this. And that's part of that scene that's just getting baked every day after school. That's not me. And I'm still on the Kiss train. So it was a very competitive thing until I got older and obviously opened up more.
Yeah. So as you know, I had auditioned for them and it didn't work out. But in the fall of 72, right after they hired Ace, they invited me down to listen to their rehearsal for whatever reason. So I actually was in the loft on 23rd Street the day that they auditioned the Kissified versions of the Wicked Lester songs, but metalized. for their producer, Ron Johnson, who produced the Kiss record. Produced the Wicked Lester record. And I just happened to be in the loft that day. So it was probably 2 weeks after Ace had joined. So they had just he had just painted the backdrop. Like they had like a bed sheet with the backdrop on the back. They were just wearing jeans and t-shirts. But they had Marshall amplifiers, which was unusual for American bands in those days. American bands still played through Fenders and Music Mans. They didn't play through, the English bands played through Marshalls. Anyway, the point is that seeing them in the loft in 72, seeing the vision they had for themselves, you could see where this could be headed, which was great. And then I saw them at Joint in the Woods, and they had just started adding, explosives to it. But then when Dee joined Twisted in 76, he was a huge Kiss fan. And he said, we got to go and see him at Nassau Coliseum. And so we went, and we were like third, fourth row. And it was mind blowing. I mean, I remember looking at it from a business standpoint going, okay, Twisted is whatever. We have to start out. And look what they've accomplished in the 3 years. This is extraordinary. So I always respected the vision, especially when I saw it in the loft. I respected the vision of what they achieved, and look what they achieved, which was actually incredible. However, at this point, I saw Zepp when I was 17. Zepp hit. I saw Zepp at the Fillmore. So I had those aha moments a lot of times, at the Fillmore East, seeing these artists like, oh my God, front row. And every time you saw another one, it was mind blowing and mind blowing and mind blowing. So I understand completely. You get caught up, but you came aboard 10 years after, 10 years after me. So your view of your center point is a different view than my center point. So your center point is focused around that. And then you jump off from that into everything. So when then did the realization that Priest Purple and all this other stuff was out there? Was it like a summer that it all kind of exploded in your head at some point?
Kind of, yeah, because I was going and getting all the rock magazines that I could that Kiss were featured in for the most part. There's a record store that still to this day exists in New Jersey called Vintage Vinyl, that at the time I was going to it, it was in Irvington, New Jersey.
We did signings there. So yes, I'm familiar.
Yeah, it's in Woodbridge, New Jersey, much, much bigger store. But when in its early years, it was in a little storefront in Irvington. And I would, when I got my license, I would start driving there, and I would get the import 45s and Kerrang and all these things that I would buy there. And and speaking of Twisted, I always I remember getting the Shoot 'Em Down single and buying it. And I used to always think that Twisted Sister was a British band because I was too young to have seen you guys in that whole club scene. I just missed it. But you were always featured in the British press and Kerrang and stuff. So it just made me assume that, these guys must be from England, not down the road, as it turned out to be.
Right.
But I started to just hear about these bands, read about these bands, and then I started to be like, okay, I want to discover some things. And here's how I did discovery, not only the magazines, but radio. And also the biggest thing for me was every summer, my family would rent or would go to a relative's house at the Jersey Shore in Lavallette, New Jersey. And we would go down there, and we would have a week or two of the summer at the beach. And the boardwalk in Seaside Heights, New Jersey, a lot of the stands, they would have the wheel where you put the quarter down on a number, the wheel spins, the number comes up, you get to pick the prize. And they had, I think one was called Union Jack. They had a couple of these stands that the prize was a record. So the back of the wall was all these album jackets. And if you won, you could pick whatever record you want. So I was obsessed. My mom would always give me a handful of quarters, and I was obsessed with playing those games to try to get records. But you couldn't listen to the records. You couldn't pick the records based on hearing them, because if you won, the guy's like, which one you want? You just got a point. So a lot of the selection was things I had maybe read about or what the album cover looked like. Like, oh, that looks like kind of like a hard rock thing or something I might like. So it's interesting because now I'm lucky enough to own a place myself, the next town over from Seaside Heights. And I go there all the time, year round. And I walk that boardwalk as I just did last weekend. And it takes me right back to being that kid, because the stands are still there. They're not doing records anymore, but they're there. And it just reminds me. So Sabbath, Heaven and Hell, Aerosmith bootleg, AC/DC Highway to Hell, things like that. I'll try that one. I'll try that one. And then there were some that I took that looked like they were going to be rock records and weren't. And I was like, okay, well, it only cost me 25 cents. And then we had a department store by us called Two Guys at the time. And they had a record department in there. And they would always have the what was called the cutout bins, where the corner was cut because the records were not selling, 99-cent records. So I'd always scavenger that, because I'm like, if I had $5, instead of getting one record, I can buy 5, maybe 2 of them are good. I'm ahead of the game and I'm learning about stuff. So all of that was like part of the early discovery.
Because you're such a Kiss fan and also a rock historian, you may appreciate an observation I'm going to make, and if you don't, you can always give me your contrary opinion to it. So with the death of Eddie Van Halen, me realizing, of course, the immense contribution that Eddie Van Halen made to the music industry, the music business, and the guitar playing world, someone said to me, well, who are the top guitar players in the United States? And I said, well, if you talk about the most influential electric guitar players, this is my answer. Eddie Van Halen, Jimi Hendrix, and Ace Frehley. And they go, Ace Frehley? I said, yeah, you may not think he's a great player, but he's probably responsible for more kids dreaming to be rock stars than just about anybody else. And I would think that you cannot deny the impact that Ace has had in terms of a generation of musicians. Would you agree with that?
I would. I mean, to go with Eddie dying, I mean, I just asked this question to Eddie Kramer, actually, because Eddie Kramer was just on my show recently. And we were talking about, he was promoting a Hendrix project that just came out. And we were talking about Eddie Van Halen being gone, and that when Eddie passed, there was this argument of like Hendrix, Eddie, as being the two guys, like as far as the biggest imprint made.
Right.
But I think, I think JJ, you're right. I think obviously you got to throw Jimmy Page into that mix.
Well, to be clear, just to make it easier, I'm just talking about American guitar player impact on American kids.
Okay.
Not because if you want to go there, we could.
Right.
That's a whole
Jeff
other
Beck,
discussion.
right.
But I'm talking about in the U.S., the 3 players that have had probably the most effect on kids dreaming about being guitar playing rock stars are Eddie, Jimmy, and Ace. That's just my.
When you frame it like that and you make it U.S. only, I got to say, yeah, I would agree. Now, more recently than that, you could certainly put Slash in there, but in terms of, and technically Slash was born in England, so I don't know how you might kick him out.
Right.
But yeah, I think that Ace is maybe in some ways overlooked in that regard. But for people that really know, there's not a guitar player you can talk to in any of these bands that was not hugely impacted by him, inspired to pick up a guitar, and loved his playing. Ace maybe not the innovative shredder or tap-on guy, but his solos, I've always said, are songs within the song. When you heard Ace, you knew it was Ace. And whether it's Mike McCready from Pearl Jam or John Five or any of these guys, they all worship Ace. So the visual stuff, the tone, the approach, the playing, everything, the character. I mean, let's be honest, the character. I mean, all of it, an enormous influence. I just heard Tom Morello on Howard Stern a couple weeks ago. And Tom's a friend of mine, and I talk to him all the time. We spend a lot of time together when I'm in LA. And Tom inducted Kiss into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And Howard is not a Kiss fan, and he doesn't get it. And when Tom said something about the importance of Kiss to him, and Howard was just bewildered. He's like, really, really, Kiss? And then Tom had to go on the air to explain to him, like, Howard, you just don't get it. Like, pick a band and they're going to say Kiss or Ace Frehley is why they got a guitar. So I think you're 100% spot on.
Yeah,
I've never thought of it in that arc and carved out as American only, but I think you're 100% right.
I also think he is kind of like the Keith Richards of America. And that is a high compliment, because again, Keith is not Jeff Beck, and he's not Jimmy Page, and he's not Clapton, but Keith is Keith. You know,
Yeah.
Keith represents and embodies an image and a style and an authenticity. And I think Ace has always been. I don't want to make this an Ace discussion. I just want to give Ace the credit that I believe he's due.
You're spot on. You're spot on. And I'll tell you what, and this is going to connect to your band real quickly here, diverting from Kiss for a second. But the guy who I always thought was the Keith Richards of bass, we just lost recently, and he produced your first album, and that was Pete Webb. Because he always struck me as that guy where, I mean, and he's a guy, not nearly a household name really, but when he passed away, Nikki Sixx was on my show. Joe Elliott was on my show. All of these guys that he had this huge impact on, but he was, people were amazed Pete lived for as long as he lived.
Yeah. I talked to him a couple of years ago. I was in England, and Malcolm Dome, the journalist, said that he had prostate cancer. So I had it, and he said, you should talk to Pete. So Pete and I spoke, and I said, how you doing? And he said, I'm doing okay. I said, are you out of the woods? He goes, I don't know. I said, can you travel right now? He goes, no. I said, I haven't seen you in 30 years, my friend. Too bad. I really love to see you. And he wasn't in the mood, so we didn't get together. One of the sweetest people in the world, a guy who was a great musician, and he embodied the soul of rock and roll.
Another one of my all-time hero bands to this day, UFO, and Pete, I met and knew a little bit, but not extraordinarily well. But just as a performer, he was the consummate rock star, for better and worse, in all areas. And I know that him doing Under the Blade for you was probably a challenging thing. I don't imagine Pete being a disciplinarian, but
no, that the word producer in rock and roll can mean anything. From a guy who really knows exactly what he's doing to someone who's just in the room going, hey, it sounds pretty good, man. Turn it up, And then Pete was one of those. He was one of the vibe. He was a vibe producer. He was a real vibe guy. He was in 1981, I was in London. I was first introduced to Pete, and there was a UFO concert, and he said to me, I want you to come to the show tonight at the Hammersmith. I'll have this guy, Steve Harris, pick you up in the hotel. So Steve Harris comes by, and he picks me up, and he looks at me, and I go, what are you into? He goes, I have a band called Iron Maiden. I said, oh, he said, we have an album coming out. And he hands me the Killers cassette tape that he made from the boards. I still have it, someplace. And it was just kind of cute because he, Steve, he worshiped Pete.
Yes.
Steve Harris worshiped Pete in so many ways, musically, stylistically, the way he approached his instrument. He was great. So to be in London, to be with those guys, especially in 81, 82, 83, it was a lot of fun, Ed. We had a good time. So at this point, which is now in 82, 83, when do you actually get that job at the radio station? How old were you when you finally got the job at DHA?
Well, that's a pretty funny story too. So I was working in a record store. My first real, I cut my teeth on learning radio when I was in high school. My hometown has 3 college radio stations, has 3 colleges rather. And one year the college, one of the colleges decided they wanted to try to keep their campus station on the air during the summer when the students left for the summer. So they came and asked the seniors at the high school, would anybody like to go over there and try out radio? So I raised my hand and went over there, because for me, JJ, everything that I did, working in a record store, I did some artist management, I did some freelance writing, I worked for a record company. Everything I always did was not about, especially at that point, making money or trying to make myself known. It was about taking this music that I loved and being able to share it with other people. How can I get platforms to help share this music that I love? So I went and and that lasted a very short time because we started having parties in there, and the college shut it down and said, that's it for that program. So then I got a job working at this record store at a nearby mall that I grew up going to, that my parents would drive me to. And I finally get a job there, and working at a record store at that time was like my dream job. I hate to say it, but I mean, I started going to a local county college out of high school, but I was never cut out for school. Wasn't dumb, just didn't have an interest. And when I got a job at a record store, it was like, my life is set. This is what I want to do for life. So I had that job for a little bit, and the owners of WDHA, which was right across the street, used to come in to the record store and shop. And I got to know them a little bit and started talking to them. And this would have been around 83. And I said to them, you know, there's a really emerging cool form of music you guys aren't playing. We're selling a lot of like heavy hard rock and heavy metal, and you guys don't have it in your programming. And they were like, well, you know, that's not what we're doing, or this and that. And I said, we're selling it a lot. You guys should really address it. Turned out the manager of the record store was a big radio geek. And he was into radio for a completely different reason than I. He was into radio because he was into top 40. He was into all the big sound processing on the voices, talking up the record right to the post, as they call it. His mentality was that. He was into that stuff. I was just into that being a platform to play records for people. So he said to me, why don't you come to my house? I live in Staten Island. I want to show you something. Go out to his house, and we go in his basement, and he has a pirate radio station. For people that don't know, a pirate radio station is an illegal broadcasting station. You're not registered with the FCC. It's an illegal transmitter. And he would turn this thing on once or twice a week and do a radio show that could be heard on Staten Island from his basement. And he said, go ahead and do an hour if you want and try it out. And long before cell phones, so we would give out the payphone on the corner as the request line. We'd have a guy there answer it, take the request, hang up, call us at the house, and play it. So it sounded, and this guy was really into the sound of radio, so it sounded really legit.
Well,
so
Eddie, was it like a 10-watt stage? Like, how powerful was this station?
Maybe more like 100. It reached a good area of Staten Island.
Okay.
So we could only keep it on for a short period of time, because the longer the signal went out, the more chance it could be traced and we could be busted. So we would only turn it on for an hour or two, once or twice a week. And
what were the call letters? Do you remember?
WISI, WISI, so WI Staten Island.
Okay.
And we had, he taught me a lot, and but he was coming from a totally different place, like very souped up production and that, but it was enough to get me to feel like I had some comfort level. And then I made a demo tape there. And when those owners of DHA came in, I said, you should let me on the radio playing some of this music on the weekend. And they're like, you're an 18-year-old kid. You have no experience in radio. What are you talking about? Yeah, I do. Here's my demo. And I handed them the demo we made. And then the record store, the manager at the record store said, look, we're selling these records. If you put them on and let them do a show, we'll sponsor the show. And that's how what many consider to be one of the first ever metal shows was actually born. And it's a pretty crazy story. And then where it went from there is there's a lot of stories from it, but that's how the whole thing was born. And you got to remember what was happening in 83 with that music. You had Quiet Riot with Mental Health blowing up. You had Metallica, who just released their first album. You had Def Leppard, who just released Pyromania. They hadn't broken yet. All of these records start to really take off. And then, so it was a perfect storm of timing. And I could show them, hey, look at what's happening with these sales. These are, of course, before all these bands broke, but I'm like, you got to jump in. Iron Maiden, another one. Obviously, Number of the Beast was out. So I had all this ammunition to let them finally give me an opportunity, and that's where it began.
Did they let you write your own playlist?
Well, yes. So doing the metal show that I was doing, yes. But I was never aware that in regular formats and in regular day parts, I couldn't pick the music. Like, that was eye-opening and shocking when they said, here's the playlist. And I'm like, wait, what do you mean? And that was a real deal breaker for me, because remember, the whole reason why I want to do radio is to share music I love. So if I can't come in there with my albums or my CDs or whatever and put them on the air, and you're telling me I got to play Steve Forbert, that's not going to work for me. Now, I've done that in my career, because you got to make a living at some point, and it's beats, digging ditches. But I would have gotten a lot further, a lot earlier in my career, and made a lot more money and had a lot better hours if I would have just conformed to what they wanted me to do. But I wasn't interested in that. Put me on at 2 a.m. if you're going to leave me alone. I'd rather take that. And as tough as that was, and for as long as I did that, the payoff down the line, meaning like now, is way greater, because you're known for something, you build an audience, you build a following, you build people that care about what you say or play. And now more than ever, that's incredibly important.
Yeah, and it made a career, and now you sit at this level in this career where your involvement is gigantic. And this takes me now to the next part of this conversation, which is that we're about to approach the 20th anniversary of New York Steel, which is mind-blowing.
Insane.
You know, and mind-blowing on many levels. First of all, 9/11 was catastrophic for all those people, especially those who lived in the tri-state area. I mean, I know that people around the world say, I watch it on TV and so on and so forth. Yes, okay, you're right. And thank you for your empathy, and we need it. But living here and watching the change here was devastating. And what happened with Eddie is, you know, I cannot separate, we've talked about this in the past, but I cannot separate the history of Twisted Sister from Eddie Trunk, because if it wasn't for Eddie calling me and asking me to be involved in New York Steel, Twisted Sister would not have reunited, and we never would have known that the world cared anything about us. But let's go back there a little bit to 2001 and talk about this. This is my memory of of how it went down from my perspective before your phone call to me. VH1 had broadcast Behind the Music, and it was a Behind the Music on Twisted Sister that was broadcast on Labor Day weekend of 2001. And it was a brutal, you know, the band was not really talking, the band wasn't getting along, and it was a brutal representation of how much the band didn't like each other. Like, I remember I was in England at the time when it was broadcast, and I called a friend of mine and said, was it broadcast? He goes, dude, I didn't know you guys didn't like each other. Man, I didn't know, you know, how much you hated each other. You know, I've said this joke before, but now it's perfect to say it again. I'm walking down the street one day around, I don't know, 1996, 97. And some guy, you know, sees me, goes, hey, JJ, when you guys getting back together? And I go, it's not going to happen. No, come on, man. It's not going to happen. Come on. What's the number? I said, there's no number. There's just no number. He goes, what? You can't hate each other that much. I said, trust me, we do. And he goes, come on, what's your number? I said, let me ask you a question. You ever been divorced? He goes, yeah. I said, how much would it take for you and your ex-wife to travel on a bus together for a month? He said, you couldn't fucking pay me enough to do that. So this is where we were at, right? So my friend says, don't come back to America. You don't want to deal with the phone calls. I come home, they send me a VHS tape. I pop it in. It's probably on September 3rd or 4th. Look at it and go, oh my God. Okay, well, any thought that this band will ever reunite is now completely over in my head. That's done. 9/11 occurs. All right. I go down to the Javits Center to volunteer the next day. People don't know, we had the whole below Canal Street was cordoned off with chain link fences. There was Army tanks down there. You know, no one knew where the attack was going to begin or end. Right. And I go down to Javits Center to volunteer, and there's 30,000 people, and they said, well, if you're not a steel worker and blah, 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 medic, we can't use you. And I'm walking home feeling completely and utterly useless, going, what? I have nothing to offer. And then you call me.
Yeah.
And talked about the catalyst of that phone call and why you
Well,
did it.
so I'm doing radio. A big part of my career change thing that happened was, so I ended up doing radio from that early show I told you about through 1994 at DHA in New Jersey. And in 94, a huge change happened where I ended up breaking into New York City radio. And even though it's 30 miles difference, it's a world of difference in terms of broadcasting, because suddenly instead of broadcasting to a part of New Jersey, you're broadcasting to 3 states and you're in the #1 market. So you have much, much more reach. So I had been on the air at that point in New York at 2 different, initially a station called Q104, which I still do a show on. And then at the time of 9/11, I was on WNEW, which is a legendary rock station in New York that unfortunately is no longer on the air. And I was doing this metal show. The metal show we talked about and how it started, I still do to this day as a weekly syndicated show. It's on about 30 stations, but there's a long lineage of different changes and evolutions of it. And I was doing it on WNEW at the time of 9/11. Actually, on 9/11, I was in Vegas on vacation with friends, scheduled to fly back to Newark that day. Needless to say, I got stuck in Vegas for about 7 days because I couldn't get back. But I also felt helpless because I'm on the other side of the country and I have friends and family and everybody in New York and New Jersey, and I'm like freaking out. So finally get back, and one of the things when we finally got back on the air was because the radio stations all went to 24/7 news. So all the formats were suspended for a while. So when I finally got back on the air and started to do my thing, one of the first things that was given to me was this printout of all these songs and artists that should not be played because of sensitivities around the time of 9/11. And that infuriated me because I don't believe in that. I think music is a healer, and for people, whatever kind of music they like, if it makes them feel better, that should be okay. And of course, to no surprise, a great degree of the music on there was heavy rock. And my audience for my metal show at that point was made up by a ton of police officers, firefighters, EMT workers, because I worked late night and they all work late night. These guys, these women and men would routinely, unannounced, show up in my radio studio back in those days and just sit in or ask for a request or want to shake my hand or whatever. I always had it pre 9/11. I mean, it was a lot looser with security. Anybody just came in. So I immediately thought of them, and I immediately thought of like, wait a minute, hard rock music is not going to be marginalized again here. There are people that are affected by this tragedy that love this music, and I'm not going to not give it to them. So I kept doing what I was doing. And then the Madison Square Garden benefit was announced, Billy Joel and all that. And all credit to them, obviously major artists and a major event, and made a ton of money and all good. But again, lacking any representation of hard rock. So my gears started turning, and I said, what can I do about this? How about if I do a hard rock benefit for 9/11? All of these cops, firefighters, they've all become friends or listeners. I want to do something for that community. So shortly before that, Hammerstein Ballroom had just opened in New York. And the promoters of it at the time, a promoter by the name of John Scher, a legendary promoter in New Jersey, New York, he was controlling that building at the time. And they had just given me a tour of it because they wanted me talking about it. They wanted me to be aware of it. And the guy who was booking it was a guy named Mark Schulman. Oh, and nice. They had said to me, hey, if you ever have any ideas of stuff you might want to do here, let me know. So it's all coming together in my mind. And I called Mark and I said, hey, here's what I'd like to do. Now, at that time, nobody was coming to New York City. And it was very tough to get people to want to come out and go to New York. Everybody was still afraid, and understandably so.
Right. If everybody doesn't know, we're talking now within 2 months of 9/11.
Yes.
So now we're talking about end of November. So it's a very sensitive time in New York still.
Completely. So
immediately following 9/11.
Yes. So Mark says to me, I said, Mark, I really want to do something for the hard rock community. I want to come up with a charity and I want to do this. So he said, let me know what you got as far as artists. So I immediately started thinking about all locally based artists, because if you do a charity event, it always makes me laugh now. People have their heart in the right place, but they do these charity events that end up making, not only not making money, but costing money. So I'm like, I want to keep overhead super low. I don't want to know about flights, hotels. I want local artists that can drive to this gig, play it, egos at the door, do it for the cause. So I reached out to Skid Row. They were unavailable, but Sebastian, who wasn't in the band then, was doing Broadway. He was doing Rocky Horror. So he said, I'll do it, but I got to go on first and then leave to go do Rocky Horror. Fine. There's my opening act. Overkill, old friends of mine. We're in, whatever you need. Anthrax, same thing, whatever you need. Ace Frehley, same thing. I signed Ace to his record deal in '86. We're friends to this day. He said, yeah, I'll do it. I said, great. You're going to headline. There's the 4 bands. We're great. I go to thinking that bill's a slam dunk for like a 3,500 cap room. I go to Mark, the promoter, and I give him the bill, and he says, you know, it's really good, and in normal times it would be fine, but we're not in normal times. You're really going to need another hook, something special, something people haven't seen in a while to try to get this over the top. And he kind of sent me back to the drawing board. Then it's got me thinking about you guys. And in this time, D had come into my show a few times to promote whatever he was promoting. You had come in promoting some reissue or something at some point along the way. I'm sure Eddie and AJ and Mark had all come in at some point. Everybody individual because of where you guys were at the time. And that's when I started thinking like, wow, it's been a while. That would be something that would really get people interested, especially New York. And I called Mark and I said, what if I got Twisted back together? And he said, then you got a show and then I'll give you the venue. And that's when I called you.
And I think you said, you know, I saw that documentary and this is like a long shot. Don't shoot me for suggesting, but what do you think? You know,
and by the way, I do remember that. And I remember you were very, as you usually are, very measured about it. And you weren't, it was very encouraging at the time because I remember you weren't like, out of the question, never going to happen. You listened and then you said, let me make some calls and see what I could do. And then when you guys were in, I've never told you this, but the difficult call I had to make was to Ace Frehley to tell him, by the way, you're not the headliner anymore.
Oh no. Gee, how did he take that one, by the way?
It was a sell.
It was a sell.
He goes, I wrote New York Groove. What do you talking? I'm singing New York Groove. What do you mean? I'm in Kiss. I go, you play all the time. They don't. They're doing it just for this. And I was like, well, you get equal set times or whatever. And it's just like, that was one of the many situations I had to massage.
I'm sure you did. You know, when you called me, here's what I thought. I said, I'm going to call the guys in the band. Either they're going to hang up on me or they're going to go, it's a bigger problem. This is a bigger issue than our personal problems. And by the way, for those of you who don't know, you know, we are a New York band. Eddie's from the Bronx, AJ's Staten Island, I'm Manhattan, and Dee and Mark were born in Queens, in case you don't know. So we are a real New York band. And so I called everyone and said, listen, guys, I know, don't jump down my throat. Eddie Trunk called me and it's for the greater good. It's to do a benefit for the 9/11. And, you know, to the credit of my guys, yes, right. yes. Which then freaked me out because we had no band. We had no gear. We had no nothing. And for anyone who's even peripherally involved in the music industry, you know, you just can't like shake a salt shaker with fairy dust and have a band appear. You know, it takes work. You got to really figure this shit out. and means we had to rehearse, we had to get gear, we had to figure out how we're going to deal with each other, and we did it. And you know what happened was Eddie said to, I think, Eddie Trunk said, are you promoting? I think I said, we have nothing to promote. In fact, I don't even want this the taint of some sort of a Twisted Sister marketing project. I said, we are doing this for one reason, and one reason only, to raise money for the Widows and Orphans Fund for the Rusty Staub organization. I said, and I want to be pure to that. So that's the only conversations I'm going to have. I'm not talking about a solo project, a Twisted project, and we all agreed that this was just that. And I think what happened was right after the show, I finished, we got off stage. We remember we had the firemen, the cops, everybody up on stage with us. It was one of the greatest nights in our life. And we walked off stage. I took my daughter Samantha by the hand. We walked out the back door, got in the cab, went home. And I kind of thought, well, that was a moment in time. It was cool. That was a moment in time. I did not know that there were journalists from England in the audience who saw the show and ran back and wrote stories about the return of the band. And that, of course, is history, because what happened was we started to get offers and we're headlining the biggest shows. And then for 14 years, the band was headlining. I kind of counted this. We did 125 headlining festivals in the 14 years after that, which never.
Yeah, I remember being astonished by that, because I remember when you guys agreed to do it, you were very adamant at the time that it was one and done. You didn't know where you guys would all stand at the end and what the vibe would be when you did the show. You did it without the costumes and everything. You just came out and played. I loved it. I loved what you did. The set was great. The reaction was great. The buzz was great. But I didn't know, and I'm sure nobody knew if it was going to carry beyond that. And for me, it was really eye-opening to see what you guys went on and did around the world, because it was the first time I realized how much more Twisted Sister means outside of America than in America. And I thought it was wonderful that you had that whole second chapter to your career, that this charitable event that to the band's credit, everybody was just, we're going to do it for the right reason. And I have to mention real quick, when I was doing the rundown of all the bands, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention my dear friend, Mike Piazza, who is still a great friend to this day. As a matter of fact, called me minutes ago. He lives in Italy now, so I don't see him as much as usual, but he, at the time he was playing for the Mets and one of the biggest sports stars in the world. And he would always come in and sit in on my show and was a huge fan of the music and the bands. And when I put it together, I said, if I do this, you got to co-host it with me. And he said, I'm in. And that, even though he's not a musician and didn't perform, that also lent the night a lot of credibility, because here is this superstar athlete that's up there on stage doing announcements and lending his support and his name to it. So that was also a really important component to it all coming together.
Yeah, and isn't it amazing that when the Mets played that following game, he hit that home run? Remember that game, that the 9/11, the game after 9/11. He was emblematic, and I didn't mean to at all leave him out. Yes, he was extremely important to the componentry of the night being special. So what you did was you brought us back. Yes, we had an amazing run. We did the Christmas album, is great, and then Sandy happens, Hurricane Sandy, and you call us again, and we did that benefit down the Jersey Shore, I believe.
I was actually Johnny Z.
Or was John? Okay.
I was there, but that was actually Johnny Z's event.
He asked us to do a benefit. And, so what happened was you did something that we had never done. You asked us to do a benefit. We'd never done the benefits before, back in the heyday of the band. But since you brought that out of the band, we always did one benefit a year after that for some cause, whether it's my daughter's eye disease or
right.
Dee's Bikers for Babies. There were various charity events, and I realized that giving back is so ultimately important, and that's why it was so successful. And I cannot disconnect your history with the band from any of that. So I'm
look, yeah, I appreciate that, and I got to tell you, it's a two-way street though, because that event doesn't happen. Mark was not going to give me that venue at that time without that cherry on the top. And if you guys would have said no, probably doesn't happen. So it was a win all the way around. It was a win for the cause. We raised about 100 grand, which again, I mean, in the big picture, not a huge amount of money, but more symbolic and more, and certainly a help, but also just, for me, JJ, it was, I've always hated the stereotypes that come with heavy metal. I always hated the fact that people think it's a bunch of Neanderthals that worship the devil and don't know how to talk or behave or act or dress. And I've always hated that. And I wanted to also put a positive light on these artists and where their heart is and the whole spirit of the night. It's something that one of my decades in the business to this day, I'm incredibly proud of. And I got to tell you, and I don't know if you know this, but I spoke to D recently, like a month or two ago. I mean, I just texted him for his birthday yesterday, but and the idea of would you ever play with Twisted Sister again came up. And he said the only way is if it was for a charity. And somebody said, well, 20th anniversary of New York Steel. And he said, well, somebody better call Eddie then. So I don't know if it's viable or what, but I haven't really given much thought to it, but you never know, right?
No, but we have had these conversations at the 10th anniversary. We've had this conversations on the 15th anniversary. Dee and I were talking today. The reason why is me, Dee, Mark, and Eddie are all going to be on Mark's Facebook show, Area 22, on Saturday, commemorating the 6th anniversary of the death of AJ Pirro. So the four of us who have not been together in quite a while are going to be on we're going to be zooming in from different locations on the radio show to talk about AJ. And I know you've been on for an hour, and I appreciate your time. I would just like to ask you, do you have any memories of AJ Pirro in particular? Do you have any stories or any thoughts about AJ as we approach his 6th anniversary of his passing?
I think Mendoza used to always say it the best. He's the nice guy at Twisted Sister.
Yeah.
because AJ was the nice guy. He was always very, not that all the rest of you aren't nice. Of course, you're all friends, and I love you all. But I always understood what Mendoza meant by that, because his exterior was always so welcoming. He was always big hug and big smile. And the thing about AJ that I always think about, beyond the fact what a great guy he was, and obviously a great drummer, is I remember when he got the gig he was doing the gig in Adrenaline Mob, and I always knew AJ for playing drums in the way he does with Twisted Sister, and he was coming in replacing Mike Portnoy, who ironically would later sub for him with you guys. But Mike is a close friend, and I remember Mike and I talking, and I said, who are they going to get? And he said, I think AJ from Twisted's coming in. And I said, he's going to play like that? Like, I mean, he's a great drummer, but that's a different style. He has chops like that, like he could do that. And I remember Mike saying to me, oh yeah, he can do it. And then hearing the record he made with them and being like, that's AJ. Like I discovered a whole nother side of his playing with that band. But the biggest thing for me with AJ, speaking of Mike Piazza, he was a fellow Mets fan, and he was completely, like, maybe more so than anybody that I knew, blown away that Mike was at New York Steel, blown away that Mike knew who he was, blown away that Mike was a Twisted Sister fan. I mean, every time I saw AJ or he would be in touch with me, it was like, how's Piazza? How's Piazza? So he was a big time Mets fan, Mike fan, and he loved the fact that he was a part of our world.
Yeah, AJ was such a Mets fan. So me, Danny Stanton, our tour manager, and AJ were the big Mets fans. And this is my memory of AJ. So we would come off a stage in Germany or Belgium or France, 100,000 people screaming, we would leave stage, 100,000 people, bombs going, We get in the van. First thing he does, pulls out his phone. I hear, fuck, they lost. That's all I hear. Or fuck, they won. Not like, how was the set? Not like, how was the song? Not like, how are you feeling? Not anything. Just like he'd sit in the back and he'd go, fuck, how could they fucking lose another game? That was AJ. And by the way, in the last, these sirens are wonderful. In the last couple of days, I just found some video of Brian Johnson playing with Twisted Sister. He came on stage and did a whole lot of Rosie with us. And in this movie that was made by a fan who gave it to me, there's this amazing footage of AJ, and he's just palling around with Brian Johnson, and his smile is the size of 10 rivers. So, you know, like Eddie Van Halen has that reputation, just like that big smile on his face, and just, you know,
Totally.
AJ was the big smile on his face. And if there was any a social animal in the band, it was AJ. He brought the other musicians in because the rest of us were kind of like, I don't know, aloof and stayed away from it. You know, Mendoza was the tough guy, and D just didn't talk to anyone, and I kind of like was measured, and AJ was the ambassador. So he was out there, and he is sorely missed. I love him. And I want to, by the way, you mentioned Portnoy. I must always add, we couldn't have had a better person come in to replace AJ when he did. I mean, Mike is just, besides being one of the world's greatest drummers, one of the menschiest of menschiest guys on the planet Earth.
And you guys could not have handled bringing Mike in and paying tribute to AJ in a better way. When you dropped that video screen and Mike sort of handed off to AJ and all that, it was absolutely beautiful and brilliant, and it felt very much like AJ was part of the band still at that point.
Thank you. So, and you know, and Mike was so freaking unbelievable about that. I said, Mike, you have a Portnoy shtick. He said, I do, but it's not applicable to Twisted Sister. We didn't want to choke him off. You know, I didn't want to make him unsatisfied. He said, you're not making me unsatisfied. I used to sneak in to see you guys at Speaks, you know, and so did Steve. I did an interview with Steve Vai recently. He used to sneak in and see us at the age of 14 in Long Island. So we had these amazing effects on these great people. And what this has allowed me to do with my podcast is to talk to the people in the business who I care about and have had an incredible effect on my life and the life of the band. And Eddie Trunk, you've certainly been that for me. And we could talk for hours, and we don't have the time to talk for hours. We could talk Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. We could talk the 5 favorite bands, your 5 favorite concerts. I mean, we could, unless you want to like rattle off really quickly your 5 favorite albums of all time, please free. But I want, you know, we could talk forever. And I love you for always being who you are and always being in our corner. So thank you.
Well, thanks. Love you too, man. And it's a bond that will always be there. And it was a really important event for me. It was an important event for you. Most importantly, I think it was important for the city. It was important for rock fans at that time. And, you know, we certainly did come up with some help for the police and widows, police and firefighters, widows and orphans fund, which was a great, we sold a ton of t-shirts. The event shirt sold out that night, I remember. So it blows my mind that it was, that it's coming up on 20 years, but it's great memories for a great cause at a really tragic time. And it's something that I'm intensely proud of having played a role in.
Thank you.